My brother laughed when I inherited our father's crumbling old house and he got the multi-million-dollar business. He thought I was a fool, a sentimental historian with no assets. But he didn't read the fine print, so I sent him a bill for his own office. This is where it all went wrong, and you won't believe the ending. Make sure you're subscribed to see how it unfolds. We love hearing from you. Where in the world are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The day of my father's funeral was cold. A sharp, unforgiving November wind whipped the black-clad mourners as we stood by the graveside. I felt completely numb, a hollowed-out version of myself. My hands were freezing, but I barely registered it. My world had shrunk to the polished mahogany of the casket and the quiet, final sound of the earth hitting its lid. I was Helen, 48 years old, a local historian, and now an orphan. I had spent the last 3 years as our father's primary caregiver. I'd managed his appointments, his medications, and in the final months, his meals and his dignity. It was exhausting, heartbreaking work, but I had done it willingly. He was my dad. My brother, Marcus, stood on the other side of the grave, next to his wife, Vanessa. He was 45, the golden boy, the one who had followed Dad into the family business, Davis and Son Construction. While I was pureeing my father's food, Marcus was finalizing million-dollar contracts. Even here, at the burial, he couldn't disconnect. I watched him check his phone 3 times during the pastor's short eulogy. His face was a mask of appropriate solemnity, but his eyes were distant, already calculating the next move. Vanessa, beside him, dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, her gold bracelets clinking softly in the funereal silence. At the small reception back at his pristine, modern home, a house I had rarely been invited to, Marcus finally approached me. He wasn't alone. He seemed to travel with an entourage of business associates who had come to pay their respects, though it felt more like they were there to network. "Helen," he said, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. He squeezed it, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt more like a display of ownership. "You're holding up okay." I just nodded, unable to find my voice. The grief was a physical weight in my chest. "Listen," he continued, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, "don't you worry about a thing. The reading of the will is tomorrow, but it's all just a formality. I'll make sure you're taken care of." I looked up at him, confused. His tone wasn't that of a grieving brother. It was the tone of a new CEO addressing a superfluous employee. It was patronizing, dismissive. "Taken care of?" I finally managed to say, my voice hoarse. "Marcus, what are you talking about?" He gave me that smile, the one that always made me feel small. "Just, you've had a lot on your plate, being the nurse." He stumbled over the word as if it were distasteful. "I'm running the company now. Dad made that clear. It's a big responsibility, but don't you worry about your future. I'll handle everything." He handled everything. That's what he did. While I felt things, he handled them. Vanessa glided over, linking her arm through his. "Marcus, darling, Mr. Henderson wants to talk to you about the new commercial park." She glanced at me, her eyes flicking over my simple black dress. "Helen, you look so tired. You should have let me lend you something." I recoiled, the implication being that my grief, my exhaustion, was an embarrassing public display. "I'm fine, Vanessa, thank you." "Of course you are," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You're just emotional, it's understandable, after all you did." She and Marcus shared a look, one I couldn't quite decipher, but it made my skin crawl. It was a look of pity, but not the kind born of empathy. It was the pity one feels for something weak, something irrelevant. As they turned and walked away, Marcus already deep in a loud, confident discussion about zoning laws, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. The man who was supposed to be my partner in this loss was already miles ahead, building his new empire on the foundation of our father's old one. I felt utterly, completely alone. I was the historian, the archivist, the keeper of the family's memories. And in that moment, I realized that to my brother, history was just another word for obsolete. I had spent my life preserving the past, while he was obsessed with paving over it. I had a terrible, sinking feeling that the funeral wasn't just for my father. It was for my place in the family, too. I slipped out of the reception without saying goodbye. No one noticed. As I drove my old, reliable sedan away from their gated community, I looked in the rearview mirror. The lights of Marcus's perfect, sterile house blazed. Against the twilight, a monument to success. I was driving toward the past, toward the empty, quiet shadow of the old family home, the only place that had ever felt safe. The next morning, we met in the offices of Mr. Elias Thorne, our father's estate lawyer for over 30 years. Mr. Thorne was a man who seemed to be carved from old-world courtesy. At 52, he had a quiet, methodical patience that I always found calming. His office was a sanctuary of dark wood, leather-bound books, and the comforting smell of old paper. I sat on one side of his large desk. Marcus and Vanessa sat on the other, looking impatient. Vanessa was tapping her acrylic nails on the arm of her leather chair, the sound like tiny, insistent clicks in the quiet room. Mr. Thorne cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Thank you all for coming. I have the last will and testament of your father, Robert Davis. It is, I must say, very clear and was reviewed by him just 3 months ago." Marcus leaned forward. "Let's get to it, Elias. We all know what Dad wanted." Mr. Thorne gave him a measured look. "Robert was a very deliberate man, Marcus. He wanted this read verbatim." He opened the portfolio. "He bequeathed several small monetary gifts to various charities and friends. And then we come to the primary assets." He paused, and the room felt suddenly airless. "To my son, Marcus Davis, in recognition of his dedication to the family trade, I bequeath in its entirety the business known as Davis & Son Construction, LLC, including all accounts, contracts, client lists, and branded equipment." A slow, triumphant smile spread across Marcus's face. He reached over and squeezed Vanessa's hand, who let out a little sigh of relief. He had gotten it, the whole thing, the multi-million-dollar company. Mr. Thorne continued. "And to my daughter, Helen Davis, who has been my light and my companion, I bequeath the family home located at 1420 Willow Creek Road, and all of its contents, free and clear." The room was silent. I felt the blood drain from my face. The house, the old house. It wasn't a home. It was a crumbling relic from the 1950s that hadn't seen a significant repair in 20 years. It was a money pit. A black hole of leaking pipes, a faulty foundation, and a roof that shed shingles in a stiff breeze. Before I could even process the shock, Vanessa whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh, Helen, a money pit. What on earth will you do with that?" I just stared at Mr. Thorne, who was watching me with a neutral, almost unreadable expression. That is the entirety of the main bequest," he said softly. Marcus, his face flush with victory, stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "Well, that's that, clear and simple, just like Dad." He turned to me, his smile wide and magnanimous. "Helen, look, I know that house is a lot, a burden really, you can't possibly manage it." He walked over and put his hand on my shoulder again. "I'll do you a favor. I know you're not in a great place financially. I'll take it off your hands. Give you, say, $50,000 for it, for the land. You can take the money, get a nice little apartment, and not have to worry about it." 50,000 for our childhood home, for the land it sat on. It was a predatory, insulting offer, and he was delivering it as an act of charity. I felt a sudden, cold spark ignite somewhere deep in the numb fog of my grief. It was rage. "It's my home, Marcus," I said, my voice quiet but trembling. "It's not for sale." "Helen, be realistic," Vanessa chimed in, standing beside him, the power couple. "That place is a teardown. 50,000 is generous. It's probably not even worth that. We'd just be doing it to help you out." "I don't need your help," I said, standing up. I felt shaky, but I met my brother's eyes. "I just need you to leave." Marcus's smile faltered. He was so used to me being the quiet one, the passive, gentle historian. He wasn't used to no, he shrugged. Fine, your loss. Don't come crying to me when the first winter storm hits and the pipes burst. The offer's on the table, for now. They swept out of the office, their expensive perfume and cologne lingering in the air like a taunt. I sank back into the chair, the weight of the house, the taxes, the repairs settling on me like a shroud. Why? I whispered to Mr. Thorne. Why would he do this? I was the one who cared for him. Mr. Thorne folded his hands. Your father was a complicated man, Helen, but he was not a foolish one. He paused, looking at me intently. He loved that house. But more than that, he loved the land. He was a builder, remember? I nodded, confused. He used to come in here, Mr. Thorne continued, and talk about the property. He and we spent a great deal of time on the paperwork for this estate. A great deal of time. It felt like a riddle I was too tired to solve. As I left his office and drove to the house, the keys feeling like lead in my heart. I kept thinking about that. He loved the land. As I pulled into the cracked, weed-choked driveway, I looked at the sagging porch and peeling paint. It was a wreck. Marcus was right, it was a burden. But then I remembered something else. My father, standing on this very porch a year ago, looking out over the fields. I had been worried about Marcus, who was pushing to expand the business into new, risky ventures. Dad, are you sure Marcus knows what he's doing? I'd asked. My father had been quiet for a long time. Then he'd said, Marcus sees the new paint, the shiny new fixtures. He always has. But you and I, Helen, we see the foundation. The value is always in the foundation. I'd thought it was just one of his folksy metaphors. Now, standing in front of my new, crumbling inheritance, I held onto that phrase. It was the only comfort I had. The first few weeks were a blur of grief and grime. I officially moved into the old house, or rather, I moved into 2 of its rooms. The rest were either too full of my father's forgotten belongings or too steeped in the smell of damp and disuse. The disrepair was, as Vanessa had so gleefully pointed out, worse than I had imagined. The kitchen sink had a persistent, rhythmic drip, 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 that echoed in the silence. The wallpaper in the main hallway was peeling away in long, pale yellow strips, revealing the cracked plaster underneath. I was 48 years old, and I was, for all intents and purposes, destitute. My job as the town's part-time archivist paid enough for my small apartment, but it wouldn't cover the heating bills for this behemoth, let alone the repairs. Marcus, meanwhile, was thriving. His name was suddenly everywhere. Davis & Son Construction was now just Davis Construction, a subtle but significant rebranding. He had a new billboard on the highway. He was running radio ads. He had, in his own words, dragged Dad's company into the 21st century. He called me once, not to see how I was, but to ask when I was clearing out Dad's junk because he wanted to come by and grab the good silver. I told him it was all mine now, part of the contents. He scoffed. Seriously, Helen, what are you going to do with it? Polish it? Just sell it. Sell all of it. My offer still stands. 50 grand, take it and get on with your life. I hung up on him. My only solace was in the study. It was the one room that felt like my father. It was where he kept his books, his old drafting table, and, as I discovered, his journals. As an archivist, I felt a pull to them. They were my world. I spent my nights wrapped in a thick quilt, a space heater humming weakly at my feet, and I read. I read about my father's life, his early struggles, his love for my mother. And I read about the property. He didn't just write about the house. He wrote in meticulous detail about the land. He had bought the original plot, 5 acres, in the 1950s. Then, in the 70s, he'd acquired the adjoining 10 acres. He wrote about the creek that ran through it, the ancient oak trees, the very composition of the soil. He had maps, hand-drawn and precise, folded between the pages. He also wrote about Marcus. Marcus has a good head for numbers, one entry read, but no patience for the past. He wants to build high and fast. He doesn't understand that strength comes from what's underneath. It was in these journals that I began to see the man I knew, the quiet, deliberate builder. The man Mr. Thorne had described. One Friday night, my lonely, quiet existence was shattered by noise. Loud, thumping music. Laughter, bright and sharp. It was coming from across the field. I looked out the window and saw a blaze of lights. Marcus and Vanessa were throwing a party. A huge one. I pulled on a coat and walked to the edge of my property line. The air was cold, but the sound carried. It was a company relaunch party, as a massive banner strung between two imported trees proclaimed. There was a marquee tent, a valet service, and at least 100 guests milling on my brother's perfect, manicured lawn. I could hear Marcus's voice, booming and confident, carrying over the music. It's a new era for Davis construction. No more small-time thinking. We're going big. Then I heard Vanessa's shrill laugh. Oh, God, no. Can you imagine? He actually left her that. I told Marcus, it's an act of charity to offer to tear it down. It's an eyesore. It's dragging down our property values. A small group around her laughed. I stood there in the dark, frozen, an eyesore, my home, my father's legacy. To them, it was just a smudge on their perfect, modern landscape. I backed away, the sound of their celebration feeling like stones being thrown at me. I retreated to the cold, quiet house. I sat in the study, my father's journal open on my lap. I felt small. I felt poor. I felt exactly like the fool they thought I was. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a sentimental historian, clinging to a past that was worthless. I looked at the peeling wallpaper and the water stain on the ceiling. I was in over my head. My anger from the lawyer's office was gone, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. I was going to lose this house. I was going to have to crawl to Marcus and beg him to take his insulting offer, just to escape. I put my head in my hands, the smell of dust and old paper filling my senses. The house felt like it was sighing around me, a sad, dying breath. And for the first time since the funeral, I truly, completely wept. The turning point didn't come as a moment of clarity. It came as a certified letter. A few weeks after the party, I was sorting through a stack of mail I'd let pile up on the kitchen counter. It was mostly condolences and junk mail, but one envelope stood out. It was thick, official, and from the county assessor's office. I opened it with a feeling of dread. I was already behind on the utilities, and I knew this was coming, but I wasn't prepared for the number. I unfolded the statement. It was the annual property tax bill. My heart stopped. I read the number, then read it again, convinced it was a typo. It couldn't be right. It was astronomical. It wasn't the $5,000 or $6,000 I had braced myself for. It was $85,000. I sank into a kitchen chair, the paper trembling in my hand. $85,000. It might as well have been $1 million. I didn't have even a tenth of that. I would never have that. This was it. The house was lost. The county would seize it. Or, worse, my only option would be to sell to Marcus for his pitiful $50,000, which wouldn't even cover the tax bill. I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated panic. It was a trap. A financial prison my father had locked me in. I was drowning. I stared at the bill, my mind racing. How could it be this high? I was a historian. I knew what property values were in this area. My house, in its current state of disrepair, was assessed at a modest value. The land, while plentiful, was zoned residential. This number, it didn't make sense. This was the shift. The panic was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but something else took over. It was the archivist in me, the researcher. The woman who believed that every number, every fact, had a source. This bill was a primary source document that I did not understand. I grabbed my coat and the bill. I didn't have a plan, just a desperate need for an answer. I drove into town, but I didn't go to the tax office. I went to the one person who had been there from the beginning. I burst into Mr. Thorne's office without an appointment. His receptionist looked up, startled, but I just walked past her. "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice shaking, "but I must see him." Mr. Thorne was on the phone, but he looked up at my expression, his eyes full of concern. He calmly hung up. "Helen, what is it?" I threw the tax bill on his desk. This is it. I can't pay this. I don't understand. Is this a mistake? How can it be this high? The house is falling apart. I'm going to have to sell." The last words came out as a sob. "Marcus will get it. He'll get everything." Mr. Thorne didn't look at the bill. He just looked at me, his expression calm and steady. He let me cry for a moment, pushing a box of tissues across the desk. "Breathe, Helen," he said, his voice even. "Just breathe." I took a shaky breath, wiping my eyes. "Mr. Thorne, you have to help me. I have to sell. That's my only option." He finally picked up the tax bill, glancing at the total. He didn't look surprised. He just nodded slowly. "Yes, that does look prohibitive." He then looked up, and his gaze was sharp. "Helen, do you still have your father's journals?" The question was so out of left field, it stopped my panic short. "What? Yes, I have them at the house. I've been reading them." "Good," he said. He stood up. "I've been waiting for you to call about this. I didn't want to overwhelm you, but it seems the county has forced our hand." He went to a large, flat-file cabinet in the corner of his office. "Your father, as I told you, was a very deliberate man. He and I spent 6 months structuring this will." He pulled out a long, rolled-up document, yellowed with age, and a newer, crisper blueprint. "I believe your only option is not to sell, Helen. I believe your option is to collect." I stared at him. "Collect what?" "Rent," he said simply. He spread the old, hand-drawn map across his desk. It was one of the maps I'd seen in the journals, but this one was an official survey, stamped by the county. "This is the original plot map for the entire Davis estate, as your father consolidated it in 1974. Do you see?" He pointed. "Here at 1420 Willow Creek is the residential house, 5 acres. "Yes," I said, confused. "And here," he said, his finger tracing a large, rectangular border that dwarfed the house plot, "is the adjoining 10 acres. The land your father started the business on. The land where the main office is. The equipment yard and all the storage hangars for Davis Construction are currently located." He then tapped the document. "Your father never subdivided the property. He left Marcus the business, the LLC, the name, the accounts. He left you the house. But the house and the business yard are, and have always been, one single, undivided parcel of land. That tax bill is so high, Helen, because for the last 30 years, your father has been paying commercial property tax on 10 acres and residential on 5. Now you are." The room tilted. I leaned on the desk, my head swimming. What are you saying?" Mr. Thorne smiled, a small, grim but satisfied smile. "I'm saying, Helen, that Davis Construction is a tenant, and you are the landlord, a landlord who, I might add, has not yet been paid." I stared at the map. My legs felt weak, and I had to sit down again. The lines on the paper seemed to rearrange themselves, shifting from an abstract diagram into a portrait of my entire life. The house, the yard, the business, it wasn't 2 inheritances. It was one, and I had the part that held the other. "The foundation," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "Precisely," Mr. Thorne said. He folded the old map and unrolled the new blueprint, which was a modern survey of the property, clearly delineating the commercial structures. "Your father wasn't punishing you, Helen. He was trusting you. He knew Marcus would see the business, the money, the trucks, the brand. He knew you would see the home, the history, the land." "But why didn't he just tell me?" I asked, my voice still shaking, though now with something other than fear. "He couldn't," Mr. Thorne said gently. "If he had made it explicit, Marcus could have contested the will on grounds of unfairness or incompetence. This way," he left a puzzle. "He trusted you, the historian, the archivist, to find the documents and put the pieces together. Or he trusted the taxman to force your hand. He knew you were the only one who would fight for the land. Marcus would have sold it off to a developer in a heartbeat." A cold, clarifying anger washed through me. All those weeks of feeling small, of listening to Vanessa's mocking laughter, of my brother's predatory, generous offers. They weren't just being cruel, they were being ignorant. They were laughing at me for owning the very ground they stood on. So, I said, my voice hardening, that tax bill, it's a business expense. It is, Mr. Thorne confirmed, and it's late. What do we do? Mr. Thorne, the consummate professional, already had a file folder prepared. We don't do anything rash. We do what your father would have done. We act like professionals. First, we get an independent, commercial real estate appraiser out to the property immediately to determine the fair market rental value for 10 acres of prime commercial land, plus the square footage of the offices. He paused, then continued. Second, I will draft a formal notice of commercial tenancy to be delivered to Marcus Davis, CEO of Davis Construction, via certified mail. This notice will introduce you as the new landowner and property manager. It will be accompanied by a commercial lease agreement backdated to the day the will was executed, and, of course, an invoice. The word invoice hung in the air, tasting of iron and vindication. He'll be furious, I said. He will be, Mr. Thorne agreed. He will be loud. He will threaten to sue. He will call you names. You will not answer his calls. You will let me handle it. You, Helen, are no longer his little sister. You are his landlord. The shift inside me was physical. It felt like my spine, which had been curved in grief and defeat, was suddenly straightening. I wasn't the mousy historian hiding in a cold house. I was the owner of a major commercial property. Do it, I said. Mr. Thorne got the appraisal done with quiet efficiency the very next day. The number, when he called me with it, made my head spin. The fair market value for the land, offices, and yards was not a small sum. It was a staggering monthly rent. The invoice for the back rent alone was more than my annual salary. Mr. Thorne sent the packet. We waited. The silence lasted for 48 hours. It was the silence of a bomb's fuse burning down. It ended on a Thursday afternoon. I was in the study, carefully archiving my father's journals, when a truck tore up my driveway, gravel spraying against the side of the house. I looked out the window. It was Marcus's oversized, gleaming black pickup. He slammed the door so hard, the windows of my house rattled. He didn't knock. He pounded on the door, a frantic, furious rhythm. Helen, open this door right now. I took a deep breath, just as Mr. Thorne had instructed. I walked slowly to the door and opened it. He was standing on my sagging porch, his face a shocking shade of purple. He was waving the legal documents in his fists. What is this? He screamed, shoving the papers in my face. What kind of sick, twisted joke is this, Helen? I kept my voice calm, just as I had rehearsed. It's not a joke, Marcus, it's a lease agreement. A lease agreement? He laughed, but it was a high-pitched, hysterical sound. For my own company? Are you insane? Did you and that senile lawyer cook this up? This is extortion. I am not extorting you, I said, surprised at the steel in my own voice. I am charging you rent. You inherited the business, Marcus. I inherited the land it sits on. You are my tenant. He stared at me. The color drained from his face, replaced by a sudden, dawning horror. He finally understood. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was scared. You can't, he stammered. Dad would. He would never. This is a clerical error, a mistake. It's not a mistake, I said, holding his gaze. Mr. Thorne has all the documents. The original plot map, the surveys, the will. Your own lawyer will confirm it. The property was never subdivided. He looked past me into the hallway of the money pit, at the peeling wallpaper and the water-stained ceiling. He looked back at my face. He was seeing me for the first time, not as his emotional sister, but as the person who held all the cards. You're trying to ruin me, he whispered, all the bravado gone. No, I said, and for the first time I felt a pang of pity. I'm just collecting what I'm owed. Rent is due on the 1st, Marcus, and you're already late. I closed the door gently in his face, walked to the living room, and sat down, my entire body shaking. The war had just begun. The first thing Marcus did, of course, was exactly what Mr. Thorne predicted. He hired a lawyer. A very expensive one from the city. They reviewed the documents, and, as Mr. Thorne also predicted, they were forced to concede that the will and the property deeds were ironclad. The land was unequivocally mine. This, however, did not mean Marcus was ready to surrender. It meant he was ready to fight dirty. His first tactic was to laugh it off. He called me, his old arrogance returning. "All right, Helen, funny joke, you made your point. You and Thorne are very clever. So, what do you really want? A few thousand a month? A lump sum? Name your price. Let's make this go away." "The price is on the lease agreement, Marcus," I said calmly. "It's the fair market value." "Fair market?" he yelled. "That's not fair. That's highway robbery. I'm your brother. You're supposed to be family." "You didn't seem to feel that way when you offered me $50,000 for this house, Marcus," I replied. "Mr. Thorne will handle all future correspondence." I hung up. His next tactic was to ignore it. The invoice for the back rent went unpaid. The lease agreement sat unsigned. He was calling my bluff. He truly believed I wouldn't evict my own brother. He underestimated me. Mr. Thorne, with my full approval, sent the next letter. It was no longer a request. It was a formal notice to vacate within 30 days due to non-payment of rent. This was the one that broke the dam. That night, it wasn't just Marcus who showed up. It was Marcus and Vanessa. They didn't even bother to knock, just pushed the front door open as I was still turning the deadbolt. "You," Vanessa shrieked, pointing a long, manicured finger at me. She was trembling with rage. "You are a snake, a pathetic, jealous snake." "Vanessa, this is my house. You are not welcome here," I said, trying to stand my ground. "This is family property," she shot back. "And you're trying to steal it from your own brother after he got the business, the one who works for a living." "He's right," Marcus said, his voice low and threatening. He stepped in front of his wife, using his size to try and intimidate me. "You think you can just kick me out? Kick Davis Construction off the land it was built on? Dad would be ashamed of you. He would be disgusted." "Dad is the one who wrote the will, Marcus," I said, my heart pounding, but I would not back down. Not in this house. Not anymore. "He's the one who left the land to me. He trusted me with it." "He was old, he was sick. You probably manipulated him," Vanessa accused. "That's enough," I said, my voice rising. "This is not a debate. You have two options. You sign the lease and pay what you owe, or you move the entire company. You have 28 days left to decide. Now, get out of my house." Marcus's face was white. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You'll regret this, Helen. I swear to you, you will regret this. I will fight you with everything I have. I will drag you through the mud. People will find out what you are." "What am I, Marcus?" I challenged him. "A woman who reads her own legal documents? A landowner? You've been operating a multi-million-dollar company on my property for free, all while mocking me for being poor. Who, exactly, is the one who should be ashamed?" He had no answer. He just stared at me, breathing hard. Vanessa, for once, was speechless. She just kept looking from me to Marcus, as if realizing for the first time that their threats had no power here. They finally left, slamming the door hard enough to shake a piece of plaster from the ceiling. The next week, their lawyer tried a new tactic, an investigation into me. They were trying to build a case that I was unstable, that I was suffering from complicated grief, that I was not of sound mind to manage a commercial estate. They were trying to have me declared an unfit property owner so a conservator, appointed by Marcus, of course, could take over. It was a vile, disgusting move, and it backfired spectacularly. Mr. Thorne, anticipating this, had already prepared a file. It included a glowing letter from my boss at the town archive, a signed affidavit from my father's primary care physician stating I was his sole, competent caregiver, and the master stroke, my father's own journals. But the investigation also uncovered something they didn't want found. Mr. Thorne, in his due diligence, had done a check on the business's financials. He discovered that Marcus, in his rush to expand, had already taken out a massive business loan after our father's death. And as collateral for that loan, he had listed the company property. the offices, the yard, the hangars. Land he did not own. When Mr. Thorne quietly and professionally informed the bank's legal department of the discrepancy in the property title, all hell broke loose. The bank, realizing their multi-million-dollar loan was completely unsecured, immediately froze all of Davis Construction's operating accounts and threatened to call the loan due in full. Marcus hadn't just been a deadbeat tenant, he had, in effect, committed bank fraud. And just like that, the tables didn't just turn, they were flipped over, set on fire, and thrown out the window. Marcus was no longer the one holding the cards, he was trapped. Mr. Thorne scheduled the meeting. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. We would meet in his conference room, neutral ground, as he called it. I walked in feeling a strength I had never known I possessed. I was no longer the grieving, mousy historian. I was Helen Davis, the landowner, and I was here to dictate terms. Marcus and Vanessa were already there, and the change in their demeanor was shocking. Marcus, who had always been so large and confident, looked shrunken. He was pale, his eyes red-rimmed and panicked. Vanessa was beside him, but she wasn't the preening, arrogant woman from my porch. She was silent, her hands twisting in her lap, her expensive jewelry suddenly looking garish and cheap. They looked like what they were, people who had been caught. "Thank you for coming," Mr. Thorne began, sitting at the head of the table. "We have a great deal to discuss and very little time. As you are aware, Marcus, the bank has frozen your accounts. They are, quite rightly, concerned about the irregular nature of your loan application." "It was a mistake," Marcus mumbled, staring at the table. "A misunderstanding, I thought. I always assumed." "You assumed the land was yours," I finished for him, my voice clear and steady. "You assumed I was irrelevant." Marcus flinched. Vanessa shot me a look of pure venom but said nothing. "The bank is prepared to call the entire loan," Mr. Thorne continued, "which would, as I understand it, trigger insolvency for Davis Construction. You would lose the business. Everything." "Helen, please," Marcus finally said, looking at me. His voice was desperate, pleading. "You can't let this happen. It's Dad's company. It's our family. You have to tell the bank it's okay. Tell them you'll co-sign something." "Co-sign?" I asked, incredulous. "You want me to take responsibility for your fraudulent loan?" "It wasn't fraud," he snapped, a flash of his old self. "It was an oversight. An oversight that conveniently benefited you while you were trying to bully me out of my home," I retorted. "You came to my house, Marcus. You threatened me. You and your wife called me a snake. You tried to have me declared mentally unfit. And now you want family to help you." He had nothing to say. He just stared at me, his desperation warring with his pride. "Helen isn't here to ruin you, Marcus," Mr. Thorne said quietly, stepping in. "She is here to correct a mistake. Your father's will was very clear. He left you a business and he left her the land. She is prepared to honor that, if you are." I took a deep breath. This was the moment I had rehearsed. I was no longer a victim. I was a strategist. I slid 2 documents across the table. "I am not here to destroy Dad's company," I said. "I am here to save it, but on my terms, not yours." Marcus looked at the papers. "The first document," I explained, "is a 10-year commercial lease agreement. The rent is at the full appraised market value. It is non-negotiable. You will sign it today." "Helen, I can't. With the accounts frozen," he stammered. "That brings us to the second document," I said. "This is a personal promissory note. I will, from my own inheritance, the one you mocked, pay the $85,000 property tax bill that is currently in arrears. That will be considered a loan from me personally to you personally. It will be secured by your personal assets, your house, your cars, and Vanessa's jewelry, if necessary. You will pay me back with interest. This will show the bank a good faith effort to clear your debts." Vanessa gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "My." "And finally," I said, looking Marcus dead in the eye, "you will pay the back rent you owe me. The full amount. Today, before we leave this room. I don't care how you get it. But only when that payment clears and these documents are signed "Will Mr. Thorne and I have a conversation with the bank about restructuring your loan, using a legal lease agreement as your new basis." It was a total, complete, and utter checkmate. I was not just saving my house. I was saving his business. But I was doing it as the bank, as the landowner, and as the sister he had so terribly underestimated. Marcus looked at the papers, at his wife, and then at me. The fight was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was the hollowed-out shell of a man who had overplayed his hand and lost everything. "All right," he whispered, his voice cracking. He picked up the pen. "All right, Helen, you win." "This wasn't a game, Marcus," I said, pushing the inkwell toward him. "It was just business." The aftermath was swift and decisive. Marcus, faced with no other choice, made a series of frantic calls from Mr. Thorne's conference room. He had to liquidate. He sold his new, top-of-the-line pickup truck back to the dealership at a significant loss. He emptied a personal investment account he'd been bragging about for years. The most painful cut, I observed, was when Vanessa had to quietly agree to use her beloved boat, the one named the CEO, as collateral for the personal loan from me. By the end of the day, the transfer for the back rent was complete, and the loan documents were signed. My bank account, which had been hovering near zero, suddenly reflected a sum I had never imagined seeing. The dynamic between us was forever altered. The public humbling did something to Marcus. He was forced to sell his boat and his secondary sports car to pay me back and stabilize his finances. When he spoke to me now, it was not with arrogance or pity, but with a new, grudging, and terrified respect. I was no longer poor Helen. I was Ms. Davis, his landlord. Forced to operate under a crushing, legitimate lease and the watchful eye of both his bank and his sister, Marcus had to change. He couldn't afford the flashy expansions or the vanity projects. He had to get back to basics. He had to run the business the way our father had, with care, with precision, and with an eye on the actual foundation. He started, for the first time in his life, to respect the ground he worked on. As for me, the first check I wrote was to the county assessor for $85,000. Paying that bill was the single most satisfying moment of my life. The second check was to a restoration company, not Marcus's, a rival firm known for their historical preservation work. The old house, my money pit, began to transform. The monthly rent from Davis Construction was more than enough. The leaking roof was replaced. The foundation, which had been crumbling, was secured. The old, drafty windows were restored, the peeling paint stripped, and the original wood siding brought back to its former glory. I spent the next year overseeing the project, not as a victim, but as a client. I used my historian's eye to ensure every detail was perfect. I poured my love, my grief, and my newfound strength into those walls. A year to the day after the showdown in Mr. Thorne's office, I stood on the newly painted porch. The house was no longer an eyesore. It was magnificent. A sign, carved from old oak, hung by the driveway, "The Davis House and Local History Archive, open by appointment." I had used the remaining funds to turn the downstairs into what my father and I had always dreamed of. The study was now a research library. The living room was a small museum, displaying his old tools, his journals, and the history of the land itself. I hosted my first group, a local university class on architectural history. As I stood in the study, my father's journals laid out on the restored mahogany desk, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. Marcus and I, we are not close, the wounds are too deep for that, but we have a functional, professional relationship. He pays his rent on time, I send him a receipt. He and Vanessa even came to the archive's opening, looking quiet and subdued. As they left, Marcus paused by the door. "It looks good, Helen," he said, his voice quiet. "Dad, he would have liked what you did with the place." "I know," I said. "He knew I would." I realized then that my father had given us both exactly what we deserved. He gave Marcus the business, the fast-paced world of money and contracts that he craved. And he gave me the true legacy, the history, the land, and the unshakable foundation that held it all up.